Story 10: The Sea Monster, Hanoi and Halong Bay, Vietnam. Lucy and Jonathan were sitting by the fireplace trying to keep warm. It was cold and windy outside and not too much warmer inside. They were bundled up in their thickest and warmest sweaters as they held their mugs of hot chocolate with both hands. Lucy took a sip of the thick chocolate drink and pondered the last few days. It had been a whirlwind. They had adopted a dog. He had followed Lucy home from school one day, and since he did not have a collar, they adopted him. Lucy named him Baxter. Baxter was a gentle dog, but still needed to be trained, and that was all they had focused on for the past 2 days. Now, sitting drinking their hot chocolate, they looked happily at their dog by their feet. "I'm going to train Baxter to be a dog detective. He's going to be the best," said Jonathan. "Doesn't look like it, based on what I see right now," replied Lucy with a smile. Baxter was trying to chase his tail and bumped into the sofa as he was doing so. He stopped and looked at Lucy and wagged his tail and ran up to her. He was a friendly dog and had already become a part of the family. Lucy and Jonathan adored him. The next morning, Lucy woke up early and looked outside the window. There was the bunny sitting, waiting for them. They knew from their previous adventures that the magic tree had sent the bunny. There was a new adventure for them. She woke up Jonathan and they quickly got ready and headed out to the forest. "Welcome," said the magic tree. "I hope you had a good cruise in Alaska. Jack was very grateful that you helped him reunite the bear cub with its mother. It was a real adventure. We thought we would miss the ship and get stuck in Skagway. But we are ready for our next adventure. Where are we going?" asked Lucy. "You are going to Hanoi, Vietnam. There is a community of people who live on boats near there who need your help. A girl named Cam will meet you there. The password she will use to identify herself is Baguette." As they had done several times before, Lucy and Jonathan pulled the lower branch of the magic tree. That opened the small door which allowed them to enter the tree trunk. There, as in their previous adventures, a backpack was waiting for them. This backpack would have what they needed for their adventure. They closed their eyes, and when they opened it, they were in Hanoi, Vietnam. At first, they were a little disoriented. There was a large lake on one side and a busy road on the other. The streets were filled with traffic and cars that jostled with cycles and scooters. It was exciting to be in such a bustling place. They waited for a little while for Cam, but no one approached them. Jonathan shouted the password, "Baguette," to anyone who passed, but apart from a strange looks from passers-by, no one responded. "We better start walking. We might be in the wrong place," said Lucy. "But where do we go?" "We have no idea where Cam is," replied Jonathan. Just then, they heard someone shout, "Baguette!" They turned and looked, and a girl was waving at them. She was a passenger on a cycle rickshaw. "Hop on," she shouted, asking Lucy and Jonathan to join her on the rickshaw's small seat. They hesitated for a second, then scrambled on board. The rickshaw driver effortlessly pedaled his way in and out of traffic, all with 3 passengers tightly squeezed in the front. "Hi, I'm Cam," said the girl. "I'm sorry I'm late." "Nice to meet you, Cam," replied Lucy. "I've never been on a rickshaw before. This is so exciting." They headed to a small shop by the side of the road. There was an old lady inside sitting on a stool. She had a pile of baguettes next to her. When a customer came over, she would pick up the baguette, cut it in half, and put meat and vegetables in the middle. "This is the best place to get a banh mi sandwich," said Cam. They sat on a low table with low stools and ordered a banh mi sandwich each. It was delicious. While eating, Cam explained to Lucy and Jonathan why the magic tree had sent them to Hanoi. "There is a floating fishing village in Halong Bay, which is about 3 hours from here," said Cam. "My cousin has a summer job on a ship there and needs our help to save the village." "Is the whole village floating?" asked Jonathan, trying to imagine what it would look like. "Yes, their houses float on water. They even have a floating school for the children. They use boats to move around their village," replied Cam. Lucy opened her backpack and, as expected, found a packet with Vietnamese money in it. She showed it to Jonathan. "Vietnamese money is called dong," said Lucy, pulling out the notes. When Lucy looked at the money in the packet, she got a shock. There were hundreds of thousands of dongs. She thought it must have been a mistake, and the magic tree had accidentally given them a fortune. But then the bill showed that it was 150,000 dongs just for 3 sandwiches. The money the magic tree had given them made a lot more sense now. They followed Cam outside and walked through the busy streets, dodging bicycles and scooters as they crossed the road. They both were fascinated by the stalls selling fruits and other wares. Lucy pointed to a man wearing a pointed-shaped hat. "I love that hat. I've seen it in the pictures," said Lucy. "It's very common, especially among farmers who work in the rice fields all day. It protects them from the sun and rain," replied Cam. They soon reached a hotel where there was a bus waiting. "This bus will take us to Halong Bay. My cousin has said we could stay on the ship for the night," said Cam. The 3 of them got on the bus. It was the most luxurious bus Lucy and Jonathan had ever seen, with large windows and comfortable seats. Soon, the 3 of them were traveling on the road to Halong Bay. Lucy and Jonathan admired the Vietnamese countryside they passed. The landscape of bright green rice fields was so beautiful that they had their noses pressed to the window. In a little over 3 hours, they reached the pier and boarded a small ship. "This is my cousin Bao," said Cam, introducing Lucy and Jonathan to an older boy who greeted them at the entrance. Bao took them to the dining area of the ship. It was beautiful, with tables all laid out. "A lot of tourists visit Halong Bay, and they stay in these ships while we take them through the bay and show them the sights," said Bao. They sat down at a table, and Bao brought them a steaming bowl of noodle soup called pho. It had meat and vegetables and tasted delicious. While eating, Bao told them the reason that they were there. There is a sea monster out on Halong Bay, he said, dramatically, while pausing to see the reactions of Lucy and Jonathan. Their reactions were not what he expected. There are no sea monsters, said Lucy, laughing. You are playing a prank on us. I've seen it with my own eyes, replied Bao. I'm afraid the fishing village is in danger, and that is why we need to try and drive the monster back to the sea. Lucy and Jonathan stopped laughing. They could tell by Bao's eyes and the way he spoke that he was not joking. Just then, the ship started moving out into Halong Bay. They finished their meal and went out onto the top deck to enjoy the view of the islands that dotted the bay. Bao pointed out the floating fishing village in the distance. They sat on the deck for some time, enjoying the view, watching the sunset. The monster is near the fishing village, and the ship cannot go near there. We will need to use kayaks and paddle out to where the monster is so that we can see it, said Bao. They went back down inside the ship, and Bao showed them their room. They loved it, especially the large window that overlooked the bay. You better get some rest. I will wake you up when it's time to go out in the kayaks, said Bao as he as Cam wished the siblings good night. In a few hours, Bao knocked on the door and they accompanied him to the bottom of the ship. There were 2 double kayaks tied to the back of the ship. Lucy and Jonathan got into one and Cam and Bao into the other. They began paddling out towards the floating village. They could see clearly as the moon shone brightly as they made their way across the calm water. Soon they got near the village. It was a collection of houses, a few shops, and a school, all of it floating on the water. Everyone was asleep as they silently made their way past the village towards a large island. As they got near, Bao asked them to stop. We better not get any closer as we don't know how dangerous the monster is. Once we see it, we can come up with a plan to drive it out of here back into the ocean, said Bao. They sat in the kayaks, gently bobbing up and down in the moonlit bay, waiting to see if the monster would appear. It was a little eerie. It was just the 4 of them in their kayaks. There were small islands all around, and it was silent except for the sound of the water. Suddenly, Lucy, who was sitting in the front of the kayak, heard a crunching sound from behind her. She turned and looked behind the kayak, and there was nothing there. "Did you hear that?" Lucy asked Jonathan. "Hear what?" "I don't hear anything," Jonathan replied. Then she heard it again, crunching coming from directly behind her. She turned around again, but this time she saw what it was. It was Jonathan. He had opened a packet of jackfruit chips that he had got from the ship and was busy eating it, crunching away. Lucy shook her head in disbelief. "I can't help it. I'm hungry. And these chips are so good," said Jonathan in response to the look Lucy gave him. They continued their wait. As time passed by, Lucy wondered if Bao had actually seen a sea monster. The islands around them were all of different shapes, and in the dark, Bao could have easily mistaken one of them for a monster. She was about to suggest that they go back to their cozy room on the ship when Bao silently pointed to a shape in the distance. They turned and looked as the shape started moving in what seemed to be circles. They sat and watched it for a few minutes. Its body was large and round and under the water. It seemed to have a longish neck like a snake that was above the water. But they could not see it clearly because of the darkness and the shadows from the islands all around. As they sat thinking about their next moves, Jonathan waved at Bao to come closer. In the process, he accidentally dropped his packet of chips into the water. As soon as the packet hit the water, the monster turned and started slowly swimming towards them. "Let's get out of here!" shouted Bao as he and Cam paddled furiously away. Lucy tried to do the same, but when she turned to tell Jonathan, she saw a shocked look on his face. In their rush to get away, Jonathan had dropped his paddle into the water. Lucy used her paddle and they tried to pull Jonathan's paddle in, but every time they reached out, the floating paddle would get pushed further away. Meanwhile, the monster was slowly making its way over to them. All they saw was the dark shadow gliding in their direction. They frantically tried to get the paddle, but then gave up. "Let's get away!" shouted Jonathan. Lucy started paddling, while Jonathan used his hands like a paddle, furiously pushing the water backwards. It didn't seem to make much difference as the monster was getting closer. Then suddenly, the monster stopped. They turned and looked, and the dark shadow under the water was still. Lucy and Jonathan paused for a second, and as they did, they saw the head come out of the water. They were about to paddle away when Jonathan shouted, "It's not a monster! It's a giant sea turtle!" Lucy squinted her eyes and looked. Now that she was closer and with fewer shadows in the water, she could clearly make out the shell under the water and the head sticking out. When Bao saw it from a distance with the shadows, it looked like a monster, said Lucy, breathing a sigh of relief. "I wonder why it suddenly stopped moving," replied Jonathan. Since Lucy and Jonathan were able to calm down, they managed to retrieve their missing paddle. Then slowly they made their way towards the giant sea turtle floating in the water, looking at them. When they got near, they saw what had happened. "Look at the turtle's leg. There is a fishing net attached to it," shouted Lucy. "The other end of the net must be caught under a rock. The turtle's leg got trapped inside the net and so it was stuck swimming around. From a distance, it looked like a monster." By now, Cam and Bao had come back to see if Lucy and Jonathan needed help. Once they understood the situation, Bao pulled out a pocket knife. He paddled across to the turtle and picked up the fishing net and cut it. Bao had freed the turtle, who swam away towards the sea. "I'm so glad that we rescued the poor sea turtle and that it wasn't a monster that could attack the floating village," said Lucy. "I think Jonathan saved the day by dropping his chips and then paddling and then his paddle into the water. Otherwise, we might have never known it was a turtle," said Cam. Jonathan looked on sheepishly. Let's head back to the ship. You both deserve a good night's sleep, said Bao. I'm missing our new dog Baxter. I think we're ready to go home, said Lucy. Me too, added Jonathan. The four of them head back to the ship. After saying goodbye to Cam and Bao, they opened their backpack and pulled out the golden egg. Then, as they had done many times before, they twisted the top of the egg. And when they opened their eyes, they were home. The end. Here are some fun facts on Vietnam. Vietnam is a country in Southeast Asia. Its capital is Hanoi. The 5 points on the star in the Vietnam flag represents the 5 different classes in Vietnam society. These classes are workers, peasants, soldiers, intellectuals, and businessmen. According to legend, dragons descended on Halong Bay and spat out jewels from their mouth, and these jewels from the islands of Halong Bay. There were hundreds of people who lived in the floating villages of Halong Bay. In 2014, a majority of them were moved to the mainland by the government so they could have better access to schools and healthcare. Today, only a few floating villages remain. Giant turtles have been spotted in the lake that is in the center of Hanoi. One of the largest caves in the world is located in Vietnam. It is so large that it can fit an entire New York City block, including the skyscrapers. That's it for this week. I'll see you all next week with another Lucy and Jonathan adventure. Bye.